The full vote in the House of Representatives finding Mark Meadows in contempt of Congress was a foregone conclusion in the Democrat-controlled chamber. It has become clear that the committee is asking two main questions. Did the president try to impede Congress's certification of the election results? And why was Donald Trump so slow to criticize the protesters as the seriousness of their assault on Congress became clear? It took several hours for Trump to release this message.
This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home.
Meadows has given the committee thousands of documents. They show that if Trump himself wasn't taking the riot seriously, at least some in his circle were.
POTUS has to come out firmly and tell the protesters to dissipate. Someone is going to get killed. Indeed, a number of members of the press, a number of members of this body, a member of the president's own family, all urged the president take action because they understood that the President of the United States had a responsibility to call off the mob.
Okay, so this is a story about what happens when someone at the very center of an alleged conspiracy to overturn an election tells investigators everything they know, provides devastating insider details about what the president actually said and did and knew, and then walks away completely free while the man he implicated is back in the White House handing out pardons to everyone involved. Mark Meadows was Donald Trump's chief of staff during the critical period after the 2020 election and through January 6th, and he has already given investigators deeply damaging inside details about Trump's actual mindset and private statements that directly contradict everything Trump was saying publicly about the stolen election. Those details are now colliding with the stunning reality that all major election interference prosecutions have been dropped, and Trump is handing out pardons to Meadows himself and everyone else who was involved in the scheme. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Despite handing over so much information, Meadows refuses to give an in-person deposition to the committee. He claims executive privilege, arguing as the president's chief of staff, he should be allowed to withhold some information. Otherwise, how could any presidential advisor give honest advice to any president? Republicans back that argument and accuse Democrats of engaging in a witch hunt.
I hope the American people are paying close attention. I hope they see what happens when Democrats get total power. They abuse it. They intimidate, they threaten, and they harass.
It will now be up to the Department of Justice to decide whether to file charges. It did so against Steve Bannon after he was found in contempt by Congress, but Bannon was a private citizen during January the 6th, not an official White House advisor, and he's given no cooperation to the Select Committee. The penalty for being found guilty of contempt of Congress is between a month and a year in prison, but even that wouldn't force Meadows to hand over any further information. Donald Trump, meanwhile, is fighting the committee's subpoenas in the courts, and there's an assumption that the committee will be disbanded if the Republicans retake the House of Representatives in next November's midterm election.
Let me walk you through what Meadows actually revealed and why it matters so much that Capitol Hill is erupting over the implications of his testimony, now that accountability has completely collapsed. After being granted immunity by special counsel Jack Smith, meaning he could not be prosecuted for anything he revealed, Meadows told prosecutors that Trump privately acknowledged the legal fight was over when the Supreme Court rejected his last election challenge in December 2020. According to sources familiar with his testimony, Trump said something to the effect of, "So that's it," and acknowledged they were done, indicating clearly that he knew he had lost the election, even as he continued to push fraud claims publicly and pressure officials to help him stay in power anyway. Think about what that means. Trump's entire public defense has always been that he genuinely believed the election was stolen and was simply fighting for what he thought was right. But his own chief of staff, the person closest to him during this entire period, told investigators under immunity that Trump privately acknowledged defeat. He knew he lost, and he kept pushing the lies anyway, lies that ultimately drove his supporters to attack the Capitol on January 6th in a violent attempt to stop the certification of the election. Trump privately knew he had lost. Meadows also confirmed accounts of Trump's behavior during the January 6th attack itself that are absolutely damning. According to testimony, when then House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy called Trump during the attack and begged him to call off his supporters who were violently storming the Capitol, Trump responded by saying, "I guess these people are more upset than you are." That quote has been reported before, but Meadows confirming it to prosecutors adds enormous weight because he was there and he heard what Trump said. The president was not horrified by the violence. He was not frantically working to stop it. He was apparently sympathetic to the mob and dismissive of the Republican leader, pleading with him to intervene. Meadows was at the absolute center of everything that happened after the 2020 election. His text and testimony to the January 6th committee and to Jack Smith's investigators showed him coordinating pressure campaigns on state officials to change election results. He was involved in the fake elector schemes across multiple states. He was managing Trump's response on January 6th itself. He was the hub through which information and instructions flowed between Trump and everyone else involved in the effort to stay in power despite losing the election. And now all of that testimony and all of those revelations exist in a world where every major criminal prosecution has collapsed and Meadows himself has received a pardon from the man he implicated. The Georgia racketeering case was dismissed on November 26, 2025, after a new prosecutor announced he would not pursue it, ending the last active criminal case tied directly to Trump's post-election efforts. The federal cases were dismissed when Trump became president again because DOJ policy bars prosecuting a sitting president, and Trump has issued broad federal pardons to Meadows and Rudy Giuliani and other close allies for any potential federal crimes related to the 2020 election and January 6th. So here is the situation we find ourselves in right now. Mark Meadows provided testimony that Trump privately knew he lost the election and pushed the fraud lies anyway. He confirmed Trump was sympathetic to the January 6 rioters rather than horrified by their violence. He detailed his own central role in the schemes to overturn the election, and for all of that cooperation, he got immunity from prosecution, and then a pardon from Trump, wiping away any remaining federal exposure. The man who could most damage Trump traded his testimony for his own safety, and then a political decision, Trump winning the 2024 election, erased whatever accountability might have followed. Capitol Hill is erupting because Democrats want hearings using Meadows' testimony and text to create a public record of what happened, even if criminal accountability is no longer possible. They argue the American people deserve to see everything Meadows revealed and understand exactly what Trump knew and did. Republicans countered that the drop cases proved the prosecutions were political from the start and that rehashing this serves no purpose except partisan attacks on a sitting president. The clash captures a fundamental divide over whether the factual record matters when legal accountability has failed and whether Congress should step in when the courts have stepped back. The fundamental question this raises is profound and disturbing. If the person at the center of an alleged criminal conspiracy can trade testimony for immunity and then receive a pardon from the person he implicated, what does accountability even mean? Lower-level January 6 rioters went to prison for years for following Trump's instructions to march to the Capitol. But the people at the top, the ones who planned and coordinated and pushed the lies that drove the violence, are walking free with pardons in their pockets and no consequences whatsoever. All right. So let me walk you through in much more detail what Mark Meadows actually revealed to investigators and why his testimony was considered so significant and damaging before the collapse of all criminal prosecutions made it legally irrelevant, even as it remains historically important. Because understanding what Meadows said and what it proves about Trump's mindset and conduct is essential for grasping why Capitol Hill is erupting over the question of whether there should be congressional action now that the courts are no longer providing accountability. The immunity deal that Meadows received from special counsel Jack Smith was reported by ABC News on October 24, 2023, and it was immediately recognized as a major development in the investigation. When prosecutors grant immunity to a witness, it means they have determined that the witness's testimony is more valuable than prosecuting that witness for their own potential crimes. Meadows was deeply involved in everything that happened after the 2020 election. He had significant criminal exposure himself, but Smith decided that what Meadows could reveal about Trump was worth giving up the ability to prosecute Meadows personally. The most devastating piece of testimony that emerged from Meadows' cooperation was about Trump's private acknowledgement that he had lost the election. According to sources familiar with what Meadows told prosecutors, after the Supreme Court rejected Trump's last legal challenge to the election results in December 2020, Trump said something to the effect of "so that's it," and acknowledged they were done. This was not ambiguous or subject to interpretation. It was a clear private admission that the legal fight was over and Trump had lost. This matters enormously because it goes directly to the question of Trump's criminal intent. Trump's public defense, and the defense his lawyers would have made at trial, was that he genuinely believed the election was stolen and was acting in good faith to remedy what he sincerely thought was a grave injustice. If that were true, if Trump really believed he won, his conduct might be viewed more sympathetically, even if his methods were aggressive or improper. But Meadows' testimony indicates Trump knew the truth. He knew he lost, and he kept pushing the fraud narrative anyway for months after privately acknowledging defeat. Everything Trump did after that private acknowledgement takes on a different character when you understand he knew he was lying. The pressure on state officials to find votes or change results was not a good faith effort to remedy fraud. It was an attempt to steal an election Trump knew he had lost. The fake elector schemes were not a legitimate alternative approach to contesting results. They were fraud designed to create a false basis for overturning an election Trump knew he had lost. The rally on January 6th and the march to the Capitol were not expressions of genuine grievance. They were the culmination of a deliberate campaign of lies Trump knew were false when he told them. Meadows also confirmed accounts of Trump's disturbing behavior during the January 6th attack itself. Multiple witnesses had previously testified that when Kevin McCarthy, then the House Republican leader, called Trump during the attack and begged him to tell his supporters to leave the Capitol, Trump responded dismissively. The quote that emerged from various sources was that Trump said something like, "I guess these people are more upset than you are." That quote suggested Trump was sympathetic to the rioters rather than horrified by what they were doing, and that he was more interested in the pressure the violence might create on Congress than in stopping it. Meadows confirming this account to prosecutors was significant because he was in a position to know directly what Trump said and did during those critical hours. He was not relying on secondhand accounts or interpreting ambiguous statements. He was Trump's chief of staff, present for the key moments and conversations. And he told investigators that yes, Trump really did respond that way when McCarthy begged him to intervene. The President of the United States watched his supporters violently attack the Capitol, and his response was to suggest they were more upset than the Republican leaders pleading for help. Beyond these specific revelations, Meadows' texts and communications obtained by the January 6th committee and by Smith's investigators showed him functioning as a central coordinator for the entire post-election effort. He was communicating with state officials about pressure campaigns to change results. He was involved in discussions about the fake elector schemes that were organized across multiple states. He was in contact with members of Congress about the January 6th certification vote and what might be done to stop or delay it. He was the connective tissue linking Trump to all the different elements of what prosecutors characterized as a criminal conspiracy. The January 6th committee materials that became public showed Meadows receiving texts from Republican members of Congress and conservative media figures urging him to get Trump to act during the attack. Those texts demonstrated that people in Trump's orbit understood immediately that the violence was a disaster and that Trump needed to stop it, and that Meadows was the person they thought could make that happen. The fact that the attack continued for hours despite those urgent messages told its own story about what was happening inside the White House. All of this testimony and evidence was supposed to form the backbone of criminal prosecutions that would hold Trump and his allies accountable for their roles in the effort to overturn the election. Jack Smith built a comprehensive case. The Georgia prosecutors built a comprehensive case. The evidence was extensive, and the witnesses included insiders like Meadows, who could testify to exactly what happened and what Trump knew and when he knew it. And then it all collapsed. Trump won the 2024 election, and suddenly the federal cases had to be dismissed because DOJ policy bars prosecuting a sitting president. The Georgia case lingered for a while with various legal challenges and controversies, but it too was ultimately dismissed on November 26, 2025, when a new prosecutor decided not to pursue it further. Every single criminal case tied to Trump's post-election conduct is now gone, dismissed without ever going to trial, leaving the extensive evidentiary record that prosecutors assemble as the only form of accountability that will ever exist. And then came the pardons. Earlier in November 2025, Trump issued broad federal pardons to Meadows and Rudy Giuliani and other close allies for any potential federal crimes related to the 2020 election in January 6. These pardons wiped away whatever federal criminal exposure these individuals might have faced, ensuring that even if circumstances changed, even if Trump left office and DOJ policy no longer protected him, his co-conspirators would remain immune from federal prosecution for their roles in the scheme. The pardons for people like Meadows raised particularly troubling questions about the entire immunity arrangement. Meadows received immunity from Smith in exchange for his testimony. The theory was that his testimony would be used to hold Trump accountable, but Trump was never held accountable because he won the election before trial, and now Meadows has a pardon on top of his immunity, meaning he traded testimony about Trump for complete personal protection, and then Trump rewarded him with a pardon anyway. The system that was supposed to use insider testimony to achieve accountability instead produced a situation where the insider got immunity and a pardon while the target of the testimony became president again. For the lower level January 6 participants who went to prison, some for years, this outcome must seem like a cruel joke. They followed Trump's instructions. They believed his lies about the stolen election. They marched to the Capitol because he told them to, and they went to prison while the people who planned the whole thing, who knew Trump had lost and pushed the lies anyway, walked free with pardons protecting them from any future accountability. Okay, So let us break down exactly what this situation means and why Capitol Hill is erupting over the question of whether Congress should act now that all criminal accountability has collapsed and the key players have pardons protecting them from prosecution. Because this is not just about one witness or one set of revelations. This is about whether the factual record of what happened matters when the legal system has completely failed to provide consequences for those at the top. Point number one, Mark Meadows provided testimony under immunity that Trump privately acknowledged losing the election after the Supreme Court rejected his last legal challenge, directly contradicting Trump's public claims that he genuinely believed the election was stolen. This testimony goes to the heart of criminal intent and would have been devastating at trial if a trial had ever occurred. Trump knew. His own chief of staff said so under oath. Point number two, Meadows confirmed accounts that Trump responded to the January 6th violence by expressing sympathy for the rioters rather than horror at the attack on the Capitol. I guess these people are more upset than you are, quote, confirmed by the person closest to Trump during those hours, shows a president who saw the violence as useful pressure rather than a crisis requiring immediate intervention to protect lives and the constitutional process. Point number three, Meadows was at the center of everything, the pressure campaigns on state officials and the fake elector schemes and the management of January 6th itself, and his testimony and text documented his role in coordinating the various elements of what prosecutors called a criminal conspiracy. He was not a peripheral figure who happened to witness things. He was a central participant who could explain how the whole operation worked. Point number four, the immunity deal Meadows received was premised on the idea that his testimony would be used to hold Trump accountable through criminal prosecution. That premise collapsed when Trump won the election and the cases were dismissed. The immunity remains, but the accountability it was supposed to purchase never materialized, raising questions about whether the deal served justice or just protected an insider. Point number five, Trump's pardon of Meadows after Meadows had already received immunity creates a situation where the witness got double protection, first immunity from Smith and then a pardon from Trump. Whatever Meadows revealed apparently was not enough to prevent Trump from winning the election and was not damaging enough to make Trump unwilling to pardon him afterward. The insider who could most damage Trump ended up fully protected by both the prosecution and the target. Point number six, the dismissal of the Georgia case on November 26, 2025 ended the last active criminal prosecution related to Trump's post-election conduct, meaning every single case built on the extensive evidence that prosecutors and committees gathered is now gone. The factual record exists, but no jury will ever evaluate it, and no verdict will ever be rendered on whether crimes were committed. Point number seven, lower-level January 6 participants received lengthy prison sentences for following Trump's instructions, while the planners and coordinators at the top received immunity deals and pardons and faced no consequences whatsoever. This two-tiered outcome, prison for the foot soldiers and freedom for the generals, undermines any claim that justice was served or that accountability exists equally regardless of power and position. Point number eight, Democrats in Congress want hearings using Meadows' testimony and text to create a public record of what happened, even without criminal accountability. They argue the American people deserve to see everything, and that Congress has oversight responsibilities that do not depend on whether prosecutions succeed. The factual record matters, they say, even if the legal system failed. Point number nine, Republicans argue the dropped cases prove the prosecutions were politically motivated from the beginning, and that rehashing this through congressional hearings serves no purpose except partisan attacks on a sitting president who the American people chose to return to office. They say the voters rendered their verdict and Congress should move on to other priorities rather than relitigating 2020. So where does all of this leave us as Capitol Hill erupts over whether to act on what Meadows revealed and what all the investigations documented? We have a situation where extensive evidence of alleged criminal conduct exists in the public record and in sealed testimony. We have insider accounts from Trump's own chief of staff describing Trump's private acknowledgement of defeat and his disturbing response to the January 6th violence. We have every criminal prosecution dismissed and every key player pardoned or otherwise protected from accountability. The question Congress faces is whether the factual record matters when legal accountability has failed. Democrats believe it does, that documenting the truth through hearings serves history and informs the public even without criminal consequences. Republicans believe it does not, that absent prosecutions, this is just partisan theater designed to damage a president the voters chose. Meadows himself exists in a strange position. The man who revealed the most damaging information about Trump from the inside is now protected by immunity and pardon, and faces no consequences for his own central role in the events he described. He traded testimony for safety and got everything he wanted, while the accountability his testimony was supposed to enable never happened. Whether that makes him a hero for telling the truth or a villain who escaped justice depends entirely on your perspective. The fundamental tension that has Capitol Hill erupting is between a factual record that shows what happened and a political reality where no one at the top faces consequences for what that record reveals. Meadows told investigators Trump knew he lost and kept lying anyway. Meadows confirmed Trump was sympathetic to the January 6 rioters. Meadows documented his own role coordinating the schemes, and none of it mattered in the end because Trump won an election and pardoned everyone involved. That is the story of Mark Meadows revealing new details and Capitol Hill erupting over what to do with that information. Now that the man at the center of the alleged conspiracy is back in the White House, handing out pardons while the lower level participants rot in prison for believing the lies he told. Drop a comment and let me know what you think about all of this. Should Congress hold hearings using Meadows' testimony even though criminal accountability has collapsed? Does the factual record matter when there are no legal consequences? And what does it say about our system that the insiders got immunity and pardons while the foot soldiers went to prison? Hit subscribe because this story continues to develop and there will be much more to cover as Congress debates whether to act on the evidence that exists and what accountability looks like when the courts have failed to provide it. See you in the next one.